1,300 members, and arguably one of the largest clubs in southern New Hampshire. And our club encompasses a broad array of constituencies within the firearm and shooting sports genre, if you will. I read this bill, and I was reading the legislative findings. And one of the observations I made, I've read a lot of literature and a lot of materials provided by the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Michael Bloomberg, that whole crowd. And all the verbiage in the legislative findings come right out of their chapter and verse. Okay, why is that important? I'll tell you why it's important. They brought a bus down here last year. Okay, and when we want to talk about credibility, probative value, or whether or not somebody can be believed, they brought a bus, they parked it out here, and they read a list of names. They called it the No More Names Tour. And guess whose name was on that list? Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the Boston bomber, killed by a gun. And they named criminals. They named people that shot at police officers. Okay? So if you want to know whether there's any credibility in the legislative findings, you need only look to where they came from and consider their source. That's the first thing that made me suspect about this bill. Okay? I oppose this bill on the very grounds that this is unnecessary, it's frivolous, and it's another example of incrementalism. Okay, this is incrementally taking away our gun rights. Oh, sure, you talk to everybody in here, you're not going to talk to one person that doesn't want to keep our children and our families and our communities safe from maniacs that shot up Newtown, Connecticut. Let's understand the context of where that came from. When all those children died in Newtown, Connecticut, the Brady campaign rated that state as having some of the most stringent gun laws in the United States. That's prior to the shooting. Okay? And then after the shooting, they went and enacted more stringent regulations. They have gun registration in Connecticut now. So I ask you, passing this piece of legislation, is it really going to solve a problem, or is this a solution in search of a problem? Finally, there's things hidden in here that the bill, that the whole scheme of it doesn't contemplate. For example, okay, it basically creates a de facto ban of shooting on private property. Now that sounds wacky, let me explain. Okay, if we look at page 4, line 3, or line 2, it gives us specific exceptions. This chapter shall not apply to. And then if we jump down, we see law enforcement and corrections agencies, we see marshals, we see federally licensed gunsmith who receives a firearm, common carrier, warehouse, or persons engaged in the business of transportation or storage to the extent that, okay, yada, yada, yada. The person who acquired the firearm by operation of law, the temporary transfer of a firearm between spouses. Okay, but, and then we go down to line 23, as long as immediately necessary, 3, that occurs at an established shooting range authorized by the government body of a jurisdiction in which such range is located. The governing body of that jurisdiction in which such range is located. So, I invite my pals over to my 100-acre parcel. We want to shoot a few guns. We can do so safely. We have the appropriate berms or whatever. It's on my personal private property. I invite my pals over. This law's in place. I hand a gun over to my pal. I say, yeah, give it a go. See if you can hit the target. The lady across the street calls the police because her cats are getting scared. And the police come down and they say, hey, what's happening here? Where are all these guns? Who owns these guns? And here's my pal holding a gun. He says, oh, he owns it. Guess what? That under this bill, that's a transfer of the firearm unlawfully because that property, according to this law, is not an authorized or sanctioned shooting range. So this comes in the back door to say you can't shoot your guns on your own private property. And somebody will get jammed up and say, oh, we need a piece of legislation to clarify that. Don't pass it. Make it inexpedient to legislate. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative Jones.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. My first question is, you were talking about the legislative findings at the beginning of the bill. Are you pretty much saying that, generally speaking, those are incorrect or exaggerated?
There's several of them that are incorrect. For example, on the first page, I didn't want to restate what somebody else has already said. For example, in the first page of the legislative findings, I got the one written on two sides here. It says, in fact, it has been estimated that 40% of all firearms are sold in the United States by unlicensed people. That statistic is nearly 20 years old and consists of a sampling of about 300 people. Okay, and bear in mind, that statistic contemplates law prior to the National Instant Check System. So that's basically a lie. But yet further down, it says here, background checks are an effective and easy mechanism to ensure that guns are not purchased and transferred by those prohibited from possessing them. Since 1998, background checks have blocked over 2 million gun sales. We heard Ralph D'Amico talk about, how people get jammed up in that. We've heard all kinds of lies. We heard one representative come up here and talk about, buying firearms on the internet without a license. Okay? That's not the case. I've purchased guns on the internet myself. And the way I did that was I made contact, I was a successful bidder. I then had to go to Ralph D'Amico and say, hey Ralph, can you send an 8 FFL to this guy down in Georgia? And he'll send you the firearm, and then Ralph, I pay him a transfer fee, and I do my 4473, and I get to take possession of the firearm. It goes from dealer to dealer. It's a lie. They're telling lies. Gun show loophole doesn't exist here. You go to a gun show and buy a firearm, you fill out a 4473. That's a fact.
Sir, we have another question for you, Representative Sandlin.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for coming. You mentioned that Connecticut already had stringent regulations at the time that Sandy Hook occurred.
That's correct.
And what I'm wondering is, are the requirements in this bill similar to what existed in Connecticut before that situation?
That I couldn't honestly say for sure. I know Connecticut, in terms of what they call assault weapons, that semi-automatic firearms, they are called assault weapons. They have regulations pertaining to those. They have regulations pertaining to the requirements of carrying the firearms. They had a regulation regarding the storage and care and keeping the firearms so that unauthorized or inappropriate persons couldn't get their hands on them. But I don't know what the specifics would be on that.
Representative Rice, is this a new question? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You referred to some of the exceptions that are listed in this bill. On page 4, on line 19, exception number 6 says a person who acquired the firearm by operation of law upon the death of the former owner of the firearm. So if somebody died in their will and left a particular firearm to another individual, that automatically excludes them from needing a background check. What would happen if the person who received that weapon was, in fact, mentally incompetent or to do this? A crime could still happen, and this person would be an exception to it. That's a loophole, is it not?
I don't know what's contemplated or meant by operation of law.
I just read it to you. A person who acquired the firearm by operation of law upon the death of a former owner of the firearm. So if they willed it to somebody,
right,
and that person they willed it to was not mentally competent, they could commit a crime. It would be known about in advance, but there's nothing to stop that person from acquiring the firearm. So isn't that, in fact, the type of loophole?
That indeed would be a loophole if that scenario played out, wouldn't it? It would.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.